there's no point in knowing about what a great marathon was going to be like without knowing who the person who's running that marathon is and what their life entails and where they have time or where they don't have time.
Are you running a marathon? Oh my god, I could never run a marathon. You sure about that? My god, a marathon? That's like 42 kilometers, 26 miles. I don't understand those people.
That used to be me, but not anymore. Welcome to the Marathon Podcast. My name is Christian Warwick. Warwick runs on Instagram, YouTube, sometimes on TikTok. Thank you so much for being here in 2026. Happy New Year. I really appreciate you being here for another year of the Marathon Podcast. This is your podcast for everything running and hopefully a great companion for you on your runs. 2025 was a great year for the Marathon Podcast. I really hope that 2026 will be an even better one. And I'm so excited about everything that we'll do together in 2026. One of the things that I'm the most excited about is probably the collab that I'm going to do with TCS Sydney Marathon on here, where we're going to come with updates on the Sydney Marathon, what you need to know, maybe more about Australian running, updates on that. I'm very excited to work with James Constantine on this and hope that you are excited as well. Another thing that I'm very excited about is a Boston Marathon series that I'm going to make. That's going to be more marathon podcast kind of series where I'm going to share my experiences with the training, my thoughts on this, but also having people on who have already done the Boston Marathon. Some fast ones, some people who have fun run it, like just talking about the Boston Marathon in general. In today's episode, we're having Jonathan Escalante-Phillips on. He is a very fast runner, and I'm very, very excited to share this episode with you guys because I feel like he is representing something that is a bit more, I don't know if I would say more unique, because a lot of people are having full-time jobs and they're squeezing in their training. But being a high mileage kind of runner and also my age, 33, being able to run as fast as he is and having the progress that he is having these days, I think is really, really cool, inspiring. And especially for me who I have ambitions with this running right now, and seeing people like Jonathan really helps me. Besides, he is also such a good guy, and I don't know if there's just this running world that is like this, but I feel like everyone that I'm talking to here, they're just people that I would love to hang out with. So I guess there's not that much to update you guys on. Running is still going well. Very excited about tomorrow, or the day that this episode is coming out, because I'm going to the New Balance track in Boston to do some track workouts there. Very happy to have that close by because it's winter here in Mass, and I do not feel like going out on a very, very snowy track. I don't think it would even be possible to do the 3Ks that I'm supposed to do there. So yeah, running is going well. A little recommendation before we jump into that episode. Jake Berekloff came out with great little documentary about his life. I'm sure you know who Ran to Japan is by now, but really, really recommend you watching that one because he has a story that I don't think a lot of people have really heard before. And I was watching that on the plane over here, and just 10 out of 10 recommend that one. Okay, with that, I think it's time for us to jump to the conversation with Jonathan. Enjoy this episode. Enjoy a run if you're going for one. And again, Happy New Year. There we go. Jonathan, welcome to the Marathon Podcast.
Thank you, Christian. Great to be here.
Yeah, I'm very excited to have you on. I think you're one of the guests that I've been planning this the longest with, because we talked, I don't know, 2 or 3 months ago. And we started talking because of, or I asked you a little bit and you were doing Valencia, and then Valencia was coming up and we didn't really get around to doing it. But I think the timing is even better now after Valencia.
Yeah, I feel probably a bit bad. I sort of said desperately wanted to sort of come on and talk, and then sort of things, life got in the way, and but I'm so glad we've had a chance. It's such an honor to sort of get to get to talk about running with
Yeah,
somebody
right.
who's so key.
Exactly. I'm very excited to chat with you, and usually I like have a bit of more of a segment before I ask you to present yourself. But I would just love for you to, tell us who Jonathan is, and you touched on this before we started recording, but like your age and also life gets in the way, like you said. So who's Jonathan outside of running?
Okay. Yeah, so I'm Jonathan. A lot of guys, or lots of those in the running community, sometimes call me Jep because that's my surname, Escalante-Phillips, so JEP. So a lot of people call me Jep. I am 33 years old, and I live in Cambridge, and I work as a teacher. So I teach a bit of a mix of things, but mostly maths and economics, and I help out with the sports program at school as well. And yeah, that's basically me. I'm married, and we're expecting a baby in April, so that's sort of going to be
Congrats.
another bit of excitement to throw in to life. And yeah, that's me.
Awesome. And when you first wrote to me, or like I asked you a little bit about, your running journey. You said that uh, as an athlete transitioning into the marathon, and like if people head over to your Instagram, they'll see that you've been running for a long time. So you might be fresh to the marathon. Also established that you are now a 2:15 marathoner. Uh, but what has your running journey been like? Where did all of this start?
Hmm. I think running became a sort of thing I was really interested in as I came to the end of high school. So just a year before I started uni, I'd done a little bit of cross country in Australia when I lived there for a few years, and it wasn't really much. I never ran a cross country event really here in the UK to take part in any of those things, but so I'd sort of run the odd bit of cross country. Australia, I was quite young then. I was in primary school. And then it was really only as I sort of came to the end of my high school time, and my uncle, who I always credit with getting me into the sport, he was over visiting uh, me here in the UK and sort of saw me as somebody who'd fallen out of love with football and wasn't really doing much sport, and said, "Right, you gotta get off your bottom and run around the block. You should be able to do that in 18 minutes." And I think I did it in like 21, 22 minutes. And I thought, I've got to get better at this. I've got to try and impress my uncle and get down to 18 minutes. And I think that was the spark for getting involved in sport. And it was just about the time when parkrun was getting established. So I sort of got started with parkrun, and then somebody suggested I go down to the local club. And really, ever since I've joined my local club here, Cambridge and Coleridge, which I've now been a member of for, I guess it's now 14, 15 years almost now, that I just sort of, I feel like it's just steadily progressed, mainly on the longer side of, of, of distance running. I did a few 800s, I've done a few 15s, but I've sort of gradually just tried out different distances, and basically sort of steadily improved over the years, which has been really nice. And I guess part of the reason one gets excited, stays in the sport when you can see improvements like that. But yeah, it's been really nice to sort of feel like there is progression there. And I, I sort of, I guess not, I could have, I could have started marathon stuff earlier. I've always been somebody who's run fairly high mileage. Um, and actually it's been quite interesting. I've been coached for the last year. So much more direct. I've always been involved with the group here in Cambridge, which is incredible training group to be part of. But I sort of saw a little bit more direct coaching this last year. And that's been quite interesting to actually have my mileage slightly back off from some of the mileage I was doing when I was running 5Ks or 10Ks. And I'm actually maybe running a little bit less mileage um, moving into the marathon, which has been
That's
quite
pretty
interesting.
unique.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I potentially, yes, probably
Yeah.
is. I mean, I think it's one of the things that it's quite nice to think that there's some scope for progression given the mileage that I've been doing. Um, but I think it was for lots of good reasons. Change of stimulus within your events. You don't want to be introducing too many things at once. So I very much understood the principle of not going in with crazy mileage and so seeing how the body reacts to different stimuli. So um, yeah, I guess I've just gradually progressed through the distances. I still love a 5K. I will probably have a bit more of a little bit of a, I think quite a few marathons like to touch back with some of the shorter stuff and to just keep in touch with that speed. It's a good way of making sure that the longer stuff doesn't feel too hard. If you run a hard 5K or a
Yeah.
hard 10K,
Hmm.
that's good, and it's a good way of getting a bit of new stimulus to the body before moving into a marathon block. So I suspect I'll be doing a few more of those. Uh, this was the first year I think that I hadn't. That's probably not quite exactly true, but pretty much most of the years I PB'd over the 5K. And this year, I think because I've had that bit more of a focus on the marathon, I didn't quite PB over the 5K, which was okay. I didn't feel like too disappointed by that, but I'd like to make sure that there's still a maybe a little 5K PB in there next year. We'll see.
Yeah. I'm curious to hear more about like what made you make that switch to marathons, because like we just, or like you just said, that the marathon distance is fairly new to you, although you are a fast marathoner, you haven't done that many of them. But I just want to ask you first, because there was something that I realized when you talked about, you mentioned the park runs, and I think that for, especially for people outside of the UK or people who are not very familiar with running in the UK, they might hear about park runs. And I realized that like the first time, I think maybe it was when I talked to Cole Gibbons the first time, and he talked about park runs, and I was just, politely saying, yeah, yeah, yeah. And then I realized like, I don't really know what this is. Now I
Mm,
obviously know more about it. But I realized that if I feel like that, I'm sure that a lot of the listeners feel the same way
mm,
too. So will
mm,
you please just describe the concept of park runs? Because I feel like that is a big contributor to the running community growing constantly in the UK.
mm. I definitely think I'm a great supporter of parkour, despite having not done very many over the last couple of years. Yeah, I certainly credit it to providing a really an accessible, safe, inclusive space for people to get involved in the sport. It's a volunteer led organization. Well, and I think there are people that are. I think it's developed certainly over the years, but at the local level, the people that manage each individual park run are volunteer based, and you're encouraged as a regular participant to do your bit of volunteering. But essentially, you sort of sign up. It's very simple to sign up online, and you get yourself a little barcode. And then literally all you do is turn up at the park at 9 o'clock in the morning. There's usually a short briefing where they explain, especially if there are people that are new, what the course is like, what to be careful of. Um, and then you sort of head off and you run your 5K. There's always a tail runner so that nobody's last, if you like. And then you finish and you get another token and they scan your personal token with your finishing token. And then all the results are up within usually a very short period of time, certainly by the end of the day. And then
Wow.
I think the brilliant thing is that you can also then track that over time, so you can sort of see week on week how you're doing, how many different park runs you've done. Um, and so I think it really balances that sense of inclusivity and participation while still providing an element of competitiveness that you can have with yourself about seeing improvements without having to pay for an event, which can be quite hard to get into these days. I know people struggle to get
Yeah.
into events, and partly because of that popularity. So yeah, I mean that's essentially what it is, and there are now hundreds and hundreds and hundreds over the UK. I mean, also, I don't know, maybe there's 1,000, but I haven't looked. But there's, you look at the map and it's covered in it. And now it's not obviously everywhere in the world, but there are loads in Australia. I think, some countries have had difficulties that they require health checks for races. I know France has had difficulties. It sort of started and then got shut down, and it's because you need a certificate from your doctor to participate in things. So it wasn't that easy for that to work. Uh, but yeah, it certainly seems to be growing, and I know that they're keen for it to be a global sort of phenomenon, and hopefully it retains its kind of free at the point of use and accessibleness that is part of its sort of mantra. Yeah.
Yeah, I first of all, thanks for explaining that. I think it's great for me and for the listeners to kind of understand more about it. And I think that it's also in a sport like running, which is like first obviously like rapidly growing in size and popularity, but also in terms of this, I don't know. We tend to think that we need so much gear to run, like that it needs to like we need to have all these gadgets, all these things to be able to run and have fun, and that's definitely not the case. Like I know that sometimes through this podcast I might contribute to that because I'm obsessed with some of these things that I'm just like very interested in. I've always been interested in tech, like gadgets, all of those things, but I also know that whenever I'm trying different sports watches, for instance, that the most basic sports watches will help you do exactly what you need to do. You don't need that to run faster or anything like that. And I think that having park runs where you have this inclusive community, but also like kind of targeting that more competitive field, whatever, I think that is such a good way to do it. And I love hearing about it. And I personally, like in Norway, we don't have that in the same way. We're starting to get more run clubs, but we don't have it in the same way. And I definitely miss that and wish that we had more of that here, where you could just like show up on a Sunday and have fun. And it almost seems like it's become a bit of a family activity. I don't know if I'm right when saying that, but I
Yeah.
heard about some people where it's just like, oh yeah, I brought my parents there and we did that, and that's kind of the Sunday activity.
Yeah, definitely. There's even over this Christmas period, a lot of the park runs have got their sort of Christmas Day park run or New Year's Day park run, and that's definitely you see whole families turning up for those because often Christmas brings people together, and so you definitely get that, and perhaps even more so on a regular basis. It's a huge social thing for people. I think it's
Yeah.
not just the 5K run; it's the hour or 2 hours that people might spend afterwards in the coffee shop afterwards. I know, friendships and uh, partners have been found through parkrun.
Hmm.
It's really become a place where runners can meet people and socialize.
Much better than Tinder.
Yeah, well, especially if you want to meet a runner, I guess.
Exactly. Okay, thanks for that, Jonathan. Before we keep going talking about your marathon, there was something that like when I was scrolling through your Instagram profile, you had a screenshot there, and I used to run in the Ultra Escalante shoes, and I assume that, or I don't know, but like I just assumed when I saw it that it was a joke. But is it actually? Do you have any connection to the Ultra Escalante?
Absolutely none at all. No, I think it was just I've never really sort of asked those at Outro where exactly it came from. I think it was I think it was a Christmas present my mum got me when I just started getting into running, and she'd seen that there was this shoe called the Escalante, and she's like, "Oh, well, I got to get it for Jonathan. That's his surname." So yeah, it was a great sort of. It was like, "Oh, that's my shoe." Yeah.
Awesome.
So, but yeah, I can't claim any anything over that shoe. I came after the shoe.
But have you tried them?
Yeah, yeah, I did. Well, yeah, it was one of the first sort of shoes I got. So I think it was fairly early in my running career, and Ultra's very much a shoe brand that is quite like low profile, big toe spreads. I think I still have that pair of Escalantes, just for like
Awesome.
memory's sake. I mean, they're super worn out. I don't wear them for like any normal runs. They probably fall apart. But just like wandering around for a walk outside, they're a good shoe.
Cool. Actually those shoes were, and I think that is also the reason why it caught my attention, is that when I was dealing with my first like running injury, I used those shoes to come back. So
Mm,
I bought them in New Zealand, and I wasn't like, I'd never heard of them even, and then this guy was like, "Well, go try them out," and I went from not being able to run to being able to run like within a day. So I'm. It could be that I'm a special case with that, but I've heard a lot of good things about it, and I think it's good because it's not like the craziest barefoot shoe that you'll find, but it still makes you run more naturally and build some more muscles, I guess.
yeah, no, definitely. It's definitely gives you the toe spray for sure.
Yeah. Okay, so let's get back to your running and the marathon distance. When is it that you did your first marathon?
So I did my first one this year in London,
Mm-hmm.
which I thought was a good place to start because it's close to home. It's perhaps not necessarily the fastest marathon on paper, but that was fine. I wasn't looking to try and sort of set the world alight with my first run, my first marathon. Um, uh, Obviously had sort of we all have expectations of ourselves and things we'd like to go aim for. But yeah, so London was it, and then after that, so deciding whether to wait another year or to have another shot at one later on in the year. I hadn't quite sort of achieved what I'd hoped for. I think I was pleased with what I'd managed on the day. It was quite a warm day in London. I thought there was some interesting comparisons of those three this year, which were sort of quite hot. London, Berlin, and Valencia was certainly towards the latter end of the race for those running a bit further or running a bit longer. It was quite warm, but I saw a bit of comparison between the three, and Berlin stood out as the one which had the biggest effect on people's
Yeah.
times due to the heat, and I think London was second, and Valencia was third. So it was a little bit warm. Maybe I think that number of people said that contributed to maybe not performing their absolute best, but I think it's really something that I've sort of learned to come to terms with more with, say, this marathon distance, which I've now done two of, so I'm not the expert at all, but it's really about what can you get out of yourself on the day, and I'm sure that applies to every distance. It does apply to every distance, but I think it's really psychologically a really important way to approach the race distance because it it takes up so much focus at a marathon, um, and one can get sort of potentially quite disappointed if you don't kind of achieve what your expectation is of a perfect
Yeah.
day.
Mhm.
And that's less important for something like a 5K or a 10K, where actually you can in 2 weeks' time or 3 weeks' time or a month later have a go at another one, and you can recover and potentially perform at have that perfect day. Whereas the marathon is not like that. You're not going to rock up the next
Nope.
week. And,
Nope.
um, I mean, unless you're Jake Barraclough, I guess, which you
Yeah,
can do the next
exactly.
day. But you're going to have to wait a bit of time, and if you're going to have in order to have the motivation for that the next time, you need to feel satisfied with what you've been able to get out of yourself on the day. So I can feel really content with what I've been able to execute in my two that I've done, London and Valencia. Doesn't mean that I'm content with that being where I want to end my marathon career, but I think it's you know I I haven't sort of worried about things not going perfect. And I think it's also helped me in on the day, that morning of or the night before when you're thinking about what is my how am I fine tuning my race plan? Thinking about those, how your body is, what the weather's like, what the competition is like, and then thinking about what is the optimal pace, your pacing strategy or race strategy. You're more likely to get the best out of yourself on the day, even if that isn't the best you're capable of on any given day.
Yeah. So heading into London, obviously you had a marathon block before that, but uh, what made you did say that you've been into the longer distances. That's something you realized a while ago. Uh, what made you make this transition or start running marathons this year? What was there something that happened, or was it just something that you've been waiting for the right moment?
Yeah, I think you know, I I've been running sort of fairly high mileage for quite a long time. And early on it was very unstructured. I didn't, you know, I haven't looked back at my sort of training diaries from way back, but I can definitely remember within the first couple of years I hit a couple of 80, 90, 100-mile weeks fairly consistently. And so, you know, I ran. It's sort of been over time. I sort of almost had people say, "Oh, you haven't done a marathon yet," and that hasn't really sort of hadn't been too much of a focus. But I think it's sort of made me realize as time's gone on that I enjoy the shorter stuff, the 5, the 10, the halves. Um, that that actually I'm not training too differently from what I would need to do for a marathon, and as long as I am confident in it not hurting me, then what's stopping me running a distance where I might potentially run well and, you know, just for myself to sort of, I didn't want to sort of get to my 50s and suddenly do my
Yeah.
first marathon and run well for a 50-year-old and think, gosh, what could I have
Yeah.
done in my 30s? So, I'm not sort of earmarking myself now as a marathon runner. I'd really like to get my half time done. I'm conscious that now in my early 30s that I'm probably not going to go and smash out a crazy fast 800.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I can see potentially having that little crack at a 15 or a 5,000, 3,000 even, just to sort of s- you know have a go running something a bit faster could be fun. Um, but I definitely still think I feel like there's scope still with some of the 5, 10, and half times, but I just sort of it's kind of a chance to explore something a little bit different, have a little bit of a focus on something else, um, and taking advantage of the fact that I enjoy running. I enjoy
Hmm.
running mileage, and just wanted to see what there was there. What was
Yeah.
I physically capable of over the marathon distance? So it wasn't like I had a set time. I was like, oh,
No.
I'm
Yeah.
gonna run a marathon this, and I've been building it up to it. It was kind of it sort of just gradually came about. It's like actually, yeah, what next year? Let's give it a go.
Yeah.
Um,
Cool. Yeah, and I'm gonna ask you more about that first marathon block because uh, I, I did say that I felt like it was a bit unique, and I think like it is a bit unique to go from 5K, 10Ks, and then lower your mileage to do the marathon block. I think most people will be like, "Oh yeah, I've been doing 5Ks and 10Ks," and so one of the big differences between my 5K, 10K training and the marathon training is that like more mileage, longer runs, but. Uh, I kind of just want to establish for the listeners here because we obviously talked about your career and like what running has been like for you, but also a bit of your times because I know that you're a fast runner and like, it seems like you've also had a pretty good fall. If we look at the 10K, like there were some races where you did very well. What are your PRs if we do from the 5K and up until the half marathon? Because the marathon is already established.
okay, so I ran last year. I ran 13:53 for the 5K, and then yeah, this well, just before the marathon. Actually, I ran a small 10K PB, 29:16. I was really pleased with that actually because it's quite a hard, twisty course in London,
Yeah.
and sort of there's just a section of about 3.5K where you slow down fairly considerably. You got quite fun and tactical actually.
Yeah, I
Uh,
saw that one.
but I think that hopefully means that I'd like to have a really good track. I feel like the 10K is a distance I could have a nice crack at, but 29:16 is my PB. And then I probably one of my best runs to date was the Manchester half where I ran 62:48, um, which yeah is probably the PB I'm particularly proud of.
Yeah, that's understandable. It's really fast. And I want to touch on that 10K that you were talking about because actually one of the things that I really enjoy with your Instagram profile is that it's so easy to see some of those. I really enjoy that reel where you had that tactical game that you were talking about where you were in the lead and then you were not, and then the final stretch I was almost like, oh, is he gonna beat him? It looked like it was so tight there. But then one thing that I also noticed was like your running technique. It looks so efficient and very, I don't know, very natural to you. Is that something that you've been practicing a lot, your technique, or is that like a very natural form for you?
Well, Christian, that is super high praise because I really feel like certainly when I started running, my running technique was something I was really embarrassed by. I was, you know, um, I do think my running style has improved. I think there's still lots of things which are probably difficult to change, perhaps at my age, and are perhaps not necessarily, you know, your body runs in a way that is trying to maximize its own efficiency. So I think it's always potentially a little bit dangerous to try and change too much too quickly. Certainly,
Yeah.
um, I mean, I think it's one of the things that maybe marathon running in particular gives you, or marathon training gives you, that this sense of really finding that state where you're running as fast and controlled.
Mhm.
And I think find that that's so important in the marathon, but also it's also important in the 10K. I mean, if you literally if you flat out sprint for 400 meters in the 10K, you are going to pay for that later on in the race, and your controlled fast in a 10K is going to be probably faster than your controlled fast in a marathon, but the same principle holds. And I think that's something that, yeah, it has something I've been trying to sort of think about, not all the time, but on my easier runs. I think just as you experience more running content, whether that's on social media or in books or in podcasts or wherever it is, you pick and choose the things that are valuable to you as a runner. And there's sort of little cues that I sort of picked up from different places that I feel like over time, literally over years, have made an impact on how I try and hold myself when I'm running. I'm certainly no Jimmy Whelan, I can tell you that. But
Yeah.
um, uh, I don't think many people can aspire to that kind of running form. But I think for anyone, it's about not trying to run in any particular way, because if you're trying to emulate somebody that's completely different to you, you're probably
Mhm.
going to get yourself injured.
Yeah.
And I think it's you know sort of recognizing when you're straining and perhaps why you're straining and what you can do to relax. And often it's simple things, just like how you're holding with shoulders or where your elbows are moving, things like that, that can make really subtle differences, but over long distances make a big impact.
Yeah, and, that makes me want to ask you if there are any like big things that you've done that or maybe even minor things, but that you really felt during a run or during a race that was like, okay, this was a huge difference or made a huge difference for my running economy.
I mean, I've got no sort of quantitative metrics on that. I mean, one thing a number of years ago that I really made a conscious effort to try and adjust, which I think has significantly impacted my pace overall, was I was a quite a heavy heel striker, basically. Um, and I sort of, you know, was seeing all of these faster runners running more towards their midfoot and forefoot. It certainly didn't happen overnight, and it certainly didn't happen smoothly. I went through a long, long couple of years of, you know, probably doing too much on my forefoot, getting various injuries related to that. Then sort of trying to be a bit more sensible and just sort of building up slowly, just doing like the last 5 minutes of a run, trying to run a little bit more forefoot, trying to do a little bit of stuff in the gym on my calves, and and then I've got to the point now where I would say I think I probably ran more basically midfoot for the whole of the marathon,
Hmm.
which and that's so I think that's been I mean that really was years of sort of transitioning, and I didn't have any sort of specific professional input on that. It was just a matter of seeing it, trying to adapt and emulate what I was seeing from some of the top runners, and learning the hard way with injuries. But at the end, getting to a point where I think my form had definitely improved. I mean, I think, more recently, there's been a couple of small things that I, feel like physically make a difference. I know that I sometimes feel like my arms come out a bit when I'm running, then I'm not
Hmm.
as streamed. And one of the things I heard recently was this idea of think of your think of your elbows pushing back a little bit as you run.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so just being sort of conscious of where your elbows are moving. It was something that as I was running, I was feeling like, yeah, this feels good to me. This feels good to me. And if it feels good, it probably means it's a positive thing. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, but nothing nothing like groundbreaking, but I tried and took off 3 minutes off my 5K time or something.
No, but I think that it still will be those small things. And I remember this is a while ago, and I think I talked to Stephen McAuley about this in the first episode with him, where we chatted about running technique. And for me, it's like obviously that everything probably comes down to the cadence, but just those small steps, like trying to exaggerate, at least for me, that has worked so well to feel like I'm barely moving my feet. And then whenever I run past like a big window, a store or whatever, I will see that it doesn't look like that at all, but I feel like I'm just running so slowly, and looking at my watch, I'm seeing that the pace is faster. Like usually I will do this for my easy runs, kind of like what you said as well. I don't think that much about it when I'm doing the harder workouts. But the reason I'm asking you, and I also appreciate the things that you're saying, because you are clearly more aware of it than a lot of people. Because some runners that I'm asking, they're like, "No, I'm not really thinking about it. Just I'm getting better as I run more," which also makes sense. But I come from a sport where the technical aspect was like the one thing that we worked on every single day. And there were like small details that we would spend hours and hours and hours doing. And we knew that that was much more important than the physical work. So, like, although, yes, we had to do a lot of work to build our capacity, it didn't really help with that capacity if you didn't solve this technical problem or challenge that you had. And so I find it very interesting to hear that, just a thing that you're mentioning with your elbow, right? That is something that helps a little bit. And like you said, it's not about 3 minutes in the 5K or 15 minutes in the marathon, but all those small things will definitely just add up in the end. And you might get, like, if we look at your race, that how much did you lose by in that, like, race when it was so tight?
Oh, the 10K, yeah.
Yeah.
I think it was supposedly. I feel like it was longer than this when he crossed the line. I think it was only about 2 seconds. Yeah,
Exactly. So when we start looking at those things, then those
yeah.
very minor details when it comes to your running form can actually make the difference between first place and second place, right? Like, because over the 10K, if we look at 2 seconds, not saying it's that simple, but it can be translated into that in some ways, I guess.
No, absolutely. It's hard, isn't it? Because I'm sure there are sort of all of these things that you could maybe do with thinking about strengthening various little things in your foot, that would set you up really well for then becoming a great runner. But perhaps not everyone wants to spend like 2 years working on like little muscles in their feet and not running at all. And then say, oh,
Exactly.
in 2 years, once your feet are perfect, you can go out on, in a good place, you can go out and run. It's just like, it's the same with me. I'm sure there are things that I could do with, I know that one of my legs, like my foot splays out slightly on my right side. And it's definitely something that I try and think about and do, but you know, it's not something I'm going to like stop running or spend loads of time doing, working on. Um, and I guess it's partly because there's some uncertainty there, right? Like maybe maybe it would make a big difference, or maybe it makes some difference, but is that some difference worth all of that extra time that you need to do. Especially if you're not getting injured and you're still running reasonably well,
Hmm.
trying to work out where do those like are those marginal gains visible and going to make a
Yeah.
difference or not? So yeah, for me, a simple cue that I can introduce in my easy running, which still means I'm running and isn't taking up any sort of huge amount of extra time, is like a little easy marginal win.
Yeah.
Um, that some other things that, gosh, I'm not sure I'm not sure I'm prepared to, I don't know, spend 3 weeks running in a heat suit for every run, 'cause
Nope.
I
Nope.
actually like running outside, or whatever. I mean, I do a little bit of heat training for Valencia. I think it paid off, but there are some decisions to be made about those marginal gains. Um,
Yeah.
so I think are really interesting and what make it fun when you're trying to make improvements.
Hmm. No, I agree with you. I think that it's also easy to kind of neglect sometimes those boring things. Like I've definitely gone through, and I'm kind of in that myself right now, where I was like, okay, I need to be better at my strength training, but then running is going so well, and then I just want to go out and run, and I know that that is not sustainable. Right? Like I know that there's gonna be one day, and I felt it this week that I had to do more elastics before my runs, just because I can feel that something is not as good as it's supposed to be, but it's still more tempting to go out for that run because that is what feels like it's gonna make me better. But I have to remind myself, and now I'm saying this in the podcast, and I haven't even done it this week, but like I have to remind myself that it doesn't matter if I'm really good at running today when I'm running Boston in April if I have to stop training in February because I haven't done my strength training, right? So those boring things, like you said, you have to prioritize like what is the most important thing, like heat training, for instance. If that's going to kill your motivation, then maybe that's not worth doing it. But killing your motivation is not it's like that sucks. And you can then be like, okay, I'm just going to do all my runs outside because that's going to give me more quality. But then when it comes to strength training, that is not something, at least for me, that's not something I can choose to neglect really, because I know that that is the most essential part of staying free of injuries.
Mm. Yeah, it's like it feels like just people talk about like you sort of hear these sort of sound bites on Instagram of oh, it's not about motivation, it's about consistency and stuff like that. And so
Yeah.
which I understand, but I feel like it can be both, right? I mean, there are things that that you're not going to get motivated by, and by having a routine, you can kind of you can do them. So I don't know if you like putting your elastic band, your bands like next to your running shoes or something, or um, you know, I mean, I like running anyway, but to me, sort of running to and from school is just like such an easy way for me to build up the
Yeah.
mileage without even thinking about it. Um, so having things which are like easy things to be routine, so that they're just done.
Hmm.
And then, but at the same time, you can also do things that can help motivate you do things which aren't easy to put into a routine.
Yeah.
Like, um, you know, um, so I remember with the heat training, I, I was reasonably motivated for it, but I remember getting myself like a, it was like a boxing ring of like the tunes that they might have for like
Yeah.
boxers. So I sort of had these tunes on with my sort of hazmat suit on, and I'd imagined I was like, sweating it out, sort of ready to fight Anthony Joshua or
Awesome.
something. And that was just like one silly little thing that I could do to sort of hype myself up for sweating it out on the treadmill for 45 minutes.
Yeah.
But
No, I
yeah, so I feel,
think no, I agree with you. I think it's kind of finding those things, and for me too, like a part of that routine is, especially now being coached, I feel like it makes it so much easier because it's not a question whether I go out for that run or not. Like this morning, I went out and I ran like 26, 27K. And honestly, like going out doing that by myself and now we're like celebrating a pre-Christmas thing with my family here, so everyone's gathered. Like, it's not the most tempting thing to do, but I also know that it's not an option not doing it. And I think that at least for me, I love getting into that. And I want to be very transparent on the fact that for me, I don't, like you said, you love going out for a run. Like, I don't always love going out for a run. Honestly, most of the time, I'm like, I wish I could do something else. But I still appreciate it when I'm out there, when I'm done with it, and I'm there for the goals. So that's kind of what drives me. And I'm not saying that is the only way to do it. I think that it sounds much better, honestly, to have that feeling of, oh, I love every run, I really want to go out for a new one or a more runs, you know what I mean?
Yeah. No, absolutely. I is it that I enjoy every single run? I don't know. Probably not. I haven't really. I almost like don't want to think about the psychology too much. 'Cause I might
No,
psych
well,
myself out.
we should just move on, and I think it is time for us to talk more about the training specific things anyways. And uh I think that I want to jump, if unless there are any real like important things that we need to take away from your London marathon block. I would love to just jump to Valencia, unless you do have something that.
Yeah, I think anything we talk about, I can sort of also talk about how we change things for Valencia
Yeah,
in comparison.
cool. Yeah, because my first question is kind of just, you did mention that you had to like lower your mileage a bit going heading into the marathons, but what was the biggest difference if you look at your training like week by week for the marathon training?
Mm. So, well, I think a bit of context here is that um, I have been, I've had definitely had lots of input from a number of people over the years. Um, but certainly prior to last October, November time, I was very much doing my own coaching, but I did think as I went into thinking about doing London that it might, be sensible to have somebody who's had a little bit more experience. I was fairly experienced about how to manage my own training for 5, 10K, half stuff, but I knew the marathon's a slightly different beast. And I also didn't want to completely break myself on my first marathon. So um, I I've through through s- through a friend of mine down in London, a guy called Jacob Allen. We've done a couple of pacing jobs over in Copenhagen, which has been fun. And I sort of got to know Jacob a bit more there. And he's telling me about his coach, David Chalfin, who is now my coach. And I really liked the fact that Jacob was talking about how specific David was, and I've really valued the fact that in our initial conversation, he was happy to sort of talk about what was my life like before we thought
Yeah,
about what the running was going to be like.
that's cool.
So we were. It wasn't so much about necessarily what is a great marathon block. There's no point in knowing about what a great marathon block's going to be like without knowing who the person who's running that marathon is and what their life entails and where they have time or where they don't have time, how
Yeah,
they can fit things in. Um, so, for me, some of the sort of big things that changed were the fact that I'm a teacher, but I currently I work 4 days a week, so I have a Tuesday off. And so we're able to sort of structure a big day around Tuesday, so
yeah,
Tuesday became more than just um, you know, a sort of classic Wednesday night interval session, which is what I would have classically done with the club. They've got a great group that you're doing so maybe 30 minutes of volume, quite hard, and we sort of transitioned for the marathon block into something that was a bit more sort of thresholdy, but still trying to sort of sometimes do stuff with the group because that's nice and sociable, but something in the morning between 5 to 8 miles, sometimes just all in one go because that would be a little bit more efficient, sort of like a steady paced, sometimes a bit more split up. and then something a little bit faster in the evening, more looking. It would vary, but either sort of half marathon to marathon pace effort um, efforts. So yeah, what changed? Oh, so sorry, I'm rambling a little bit. I think
No, you're good.
one of the things that's when I spoke to David about what the marathon build would look like, um, was that this would be a sort of this would be a change of stimulus. And so I can't remember if we spoke about this explicitly, but I think part of the rationale was that if you're doing these much larger days, days where you're incorporating, maybe up to 20 to 24 miles of volume, that you know that you need some serious recovering after those if you're going to recover, and that that is already a fairly big change to your standard training cycle, and so it makes sense to not try and change, you know, change too many things like the session itself and the volume. So I wouldn't say that I've necessarily dropped a huge amount of dropped in mileage, but I certainly haven't. There was certainly wasn't like a huge increase, and there was
Yeah.
certainly, I think, in the past, if I'd sort of done a big race, a 5K, a 10K, or a half, I would be jumping back into like a fairly normal training cycle pretty quickly. Whereas I think under David's guidance, I'd definitely seen the value of having a couple of easier days after a really hard effort. I like to refer to those as the days where you really go to the well.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
And race day is definitely one of those, or should be,
Yeah.
right? I mean,
Yeah.
race days where you give it your all. Um, I mean, hopefully in a sensible, strategized way, but you really go to the well, and whenever you go to the well, you need to recognize that your body needs to sort of fill that well up,
Hmm.
replenish. So I think those weeks post big efforts were sort of definitely lower in mileage, maybe more like 70, 75, 80 miles maybe. Whereas before I would have just jumped straight back into a 100-mile week.
Yeah.
Uh, and I think what's borne out from that is that I've really, I had a weird thing post London, like immediately post London, and I had a weird thing in my calf, or the bone on my shin, and it wasn't exactly. We never really got to the bottom of it, but I don't think I was worried it might be a stress response. I don't think it was, and in the end, it sort of just went away. Um, but apart from that, which could have just been a freak thing within the marathon, I've really not had anything that's sort of put me out for an substantial period of time at all. And I think that sort of periodizing of efforts post really hard efforts has made a big difference in that. There are things that I sort of I bring to the table as well. Like, so for example, we have a number of sort of really good triathletes here, and you see somebody like Alex Yee
Yeah.
running amazingly. And I sort of think maybe there's some opportunity for still keeping some aerobic efforts, even if the mileage is perhaps a little bit lower. So that's something I'm keen to explore potentially in terms of, you know, whether or not the mileage goes up, that maybe introducing a bit more aerobic stuff on either on the bike or the cross trainer is a way of, I think, increasing stimulus without necessarily increasing injuries.
Yeah.
But I think that's been the main reason why my mileage hasn't sort of gone that high. I mean, when I say it
Yeah.
hasn't gone that high, you know, I hear a number of the guys on the podcast. Dave is talking about 120, 127-mile weeks. I haven't got anywhere near that, but I did have 113-mile week in there. So there were a couple of weeks where got up a bit higher than just 100 miles. I'd love to run a bit more. I'll be honest.
Yeah.
I'd love to get up to the 120-mile plus range. And, you know, that's a conversation. That's the fun thing I think about being a slightly older athlete as well. You can have those kind of conversations with a coach, and um, I really, really trust David, and I also really value the fact that he looked for my input. So after Valencia,
Mhm.
he asked for my thoughts about the race and my thoughts about the build up and what I'd like to look for next year and stuff. So it's it's a it's fun just to be able to discuss with somebody who's invested in your own running
Mhm.
about what's next without it. I mean, to be honest, in general, I take what he gives me as given and do it. But I know that he'd very much take on board things that I'd say if I really felt strongly about it. And he takes into account my circumstances in terms of, you know, the fact that I like to commute to and from work. And that's
Yeah.
an efficient way for me to do my running it.
And one thing that I thought about now that you were talking about this, because you were talking about like 10Ks, you were talking about half marathons as well, like doing those and how to adjust after. And one thing that I probably should have been better at talking about on the podcast when I talk to runners and their training. And we talked about this before we started recording. Like, what is it that is that we can talk about that hasn't already been talked about, kind of? And what I realized is that yes, we have these training blocks, but then there are things that people might not talk about because it's not something that happens every week, and that is the races. So, like for you, for instance, you did a few races leading up to Valencia, and uh, can you say something about the thoughts behind doing that? Because I am sure that that is like put into a system, and it's although it might seem like, oh yeah, it was a race that day. I'm sure there's a plan and an idea behind all of that.
Yeah. So when we plan out, when we were planning, say, to Valencia, um, I David would ask me what kind of events I'd like to do in the lead up. And basically, I really, really enjoy racing. I really enjoy racing. And, you know, maybe I would have made a better 1500 or 5K run if I'd really made that my focus. Maybe hadn't run too much high mileage when I was younger. And I know I put a relatively good kick at the end of races, which I think that's what excites me about races. Because I know that if I'm towards the sharp end of the race, um, I've got a good chance of being competitive at the end. So I think all of that makes me excited about racing and makes me want to race more, not just for the sake of getting a good time, but for the thrill of having a race. Um, so, I'm conscious that sometimes doing as many races as I might say I want to do is not necessarily the best thing for, say, running the best possible time in Valencia, say. Because, as we've mentioned, every time you run a really hard race, there's merit to taking a little bit of downtime, or at least not jumping in immediately with a super hard Tuesday if you've run a half marathon or a 10K
Hmm.
on the Sunday just before. So there are trade-offs if you like. I mean, potential trade-offs. You might say that actually the race itself gives you a stimulus,
Yeah.
so you take them on to the next level. But I certainly think with marathon training, if you're constantly tapering down and having to have several days afterwards to recover, you're not building, maybe as much durability for the marathon, say. So I can understand that reason, and I definitely know when I initially sent my list of races, it was just like, no, 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 we can't do that many. That's you'd be racing every week. So we
Yeah.
definitely you definitely sort of we cut back what um what was sort of initially on my kind of, oh, this would be fun to do kind of thing. Um so yeah, I think I enjoy racing. I chose to do a couple of races in the lead up. And if I'm honest, I mean part part of it was half marathons are a good gauge of kind of what your kind of where your sort of lactate threshold roughly is, because that roughly correlates. If you're running roughly about an hour hard, that's gives you a good idea of roughly where you're at. So the Great North Run and the Manchester Half were sort of two ones to do. The Manchester Half, I guess, was more for that kind of reason as or had that benefit of giving me a sense of where I was at. But if I'm honest, like the Great North Run, I chose because I've never done the Great North Run before, and
Hmm.
it looks just an awesome event, and it was reasonably spaced out between some of the other events, and it was just an exciting event that I wanted to do. And then and Fulham likewise was was the one event I did last year that I enjoyed. Um, there are a fairly limited number of really competitive events over the calendar year, and that was one that fitted in at that point in time. There are actually a number of other events that same weekend, but that was one that was relatively easy for me to get to. And so, you know, there was a rhyme and reason for those races in the sense of we gave them a bit of spacing. So they weren't just
Hmm.
like consecutive weekends of lots of races. Um, but it wasn't so much that, we must have a half marathon 6 weeks out from
Yeah.
Valencia or 8 weeks out. Um, and once we've established which of those races were ones I was keen on doing and that broadly made sense, Daily would then fit what would be an optimal build for those races being incorporated into it.
Yeah.
So they weren't. It wasn't like a last minute decision. Um,
No, no, and I just assume that just like you said now that this was, like definitely a part of the plan. And the reason I'm asking about it is that for my first marathon block that I did, I also had a couple of 10Ks in there. And I realized that sometimes when I talk about that block, I talk about my training, I talk about what I did, and I kind of just forget about that because I think of it like, oh, but that was just a 10K here and a 10K there. And historically, at least for me, back when I was like a full time athlete, I knew that those races, and as a speed skater, we competed for like, say, 4 to 7 minutes at the time. That really enhanced my performances going forwards. Like, whenever I raced, because of that high intensity, that kind of just, I got better every time. And so I believe that by doing what you've done, you probably have kind of like you said, you trigger something, and then it will always be the question like, how much should I adjust for this race? Should I run less the week before because I want to run faster? But you still will have to adjust maybe after. But I I still really believe in this, but think it's interesting to hear, your take on, say you did a marathon block without those races, and there are so many elements to why you should do it. Like, first of all, it sounds like it motivates you, so it makes it more fun for you, and that's like maybe the best or biggest part of this. And then you have the other part, which is like, it physically it will make you maybe better because you get that like you're pushing through, and then you have a couple few weeks of training again. What would you say from your side, or what is your take on like the biggest benefits performance wise for Valencia with those races?
yeah. So on the performance side, I think especially if you're having quite a long build, I think most people would say, if you just have 20 weeks of trying to have a marathon build, you're probably going to get a bit stagnant. You know, you're it's going to be hard to, like it's hard for the body to maintain that sort of level of intensity with American build, and you probably need some down, every 6 or 8 weeks, a slight down week or somewhere where you're allowing some recuperation. Um, and it almost feels like that sort of, although it wasn't in like a perfectly regular cycle, that was kind of what the races did. They kind of forced this rest.
Yeah,
Um, so you kind of had that build, and then you had a bit of a downtime, and then you also got a chance to have a bit of a stimulus with the race at the end of that week. I guess the difference between doing a race versus just having a down week is that you also needed a bit of, you know, downtime or less intensity for a couple of days or maybe up to 5 days of a half marathon afterwards to sort of
yeah,
to recover. So there's a slight difference there, but I think in that general principle, it's like a way of splitting up the marathon cycle. And I think, yeah, absolutely, that's also just that sense of, um, you know, even if you've got a session that's meant to be a bit more of a stimulus session, those can be really hard to execute well if you're in the
Yep.
middle of marathon training. You
Yep.
know, you can try, you might say, okay, we're gonna do today's gonna be 5 by a mile off 2 minutes, try to run these at 10K pace or whatever. That could be super hard. I'm trying to think. There was definitely one session I did. How was it just before, like the week before Manchester or the week before the 10K? I think it was the week before the 10K. And I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was less than 10K of volume with quite a bit of rest. Oh, I'm used to fairly short rest, so it might have been like 90 seconds, which was barely long for me. And I was nowhere near the pace that I sustained for 10K all in one go in the race. So you get so
Exactly.
much more out of yourself on the race than you would even if you're trying to run fast on a session.
Hmm.
So I think if you know that you're somebody that struggles to do that, if you know that actually you for whatever reason find it hard to smash it out of the park on a session when you're trying to run hard, then actually maybe a race is a great way of doing that. But on not a performance side of things, but something that I think really is important to me and something that I have really valued in both the London and the Valencia build is, as we've talked about with the marathon, you can't just go and rock up the next day or the next week and run one. And, things can go not things can go wrong. I mean, things out of your control. You can get ill. The weather can be rubbish. You can get tripped up at the start. So, you might drop your gels. All of these things can happen on the day, things that are out of your control or substantially out of your control. And that can be really hard to take, like psychologically, if
Exactly.
if
Yeah.
you've done this huge thing, you built a huge amount of fitness, and then
Hmm.
on the actual day, things don't pan out. And what incorporating some races along the way, it gives you the opportunity to show that fitness on some other occasions
Yeah.
and something to sort of reflect on as like for me, yes, I'm happy with my 2:15 at Valencia. I feel like that was a good performance in the day. But actually, I'm really proud of that Manchester half performance, my
Hmm.
2:58.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
and I'm sure I achieved that time as a consequence of a good marathon build. So your marathon build doesn't have to just be. You don't just have to have your marathon to show for your marathon build.
It's almost like an insurance for yourself in a lot of ways that you
Right.
you will still have some good races when you're in good shape. I love that. Uh, Okay, so time flies here, but if we were to go through like a standard training week for you building up to Valencia, you did say that you have like a bit of a bigger day on Tuesdays, but if you were to still just take us through the week from Monday to Sunday, what does it usually look like?
So it would basically depend on what the Sunday before had been. So if it was a more marathon specific session on the Tuesday on the Sunday, the first, I probably wouldn't have anything too big on the Tuesday. It'd still probably be a double day and maybe with a little bit of effort. But if we assume Sunday was more of just a general long run, then Monday would be probably somewhere around 10 miles, either as a split double, running to and from work, or if I was cycling to work, I'd just do a single 10-mile run back. And then Tuesday, again, it would depend on where I was in the cycle. But say if we picked like somewhere roughly in the middle, it might be 7 to 8 miles running. Usually, you know, if we're talking like lactate thresholds, roughly around my first lactate threshold. I haven't had mine tested that recently, but a couple of years ago, it was I think around 5:20 a mile pace through whatever that
Mhm.
is, 3:24. Okay, so something around there for between 6 to 9 miles. Um, quite often done as a single set. So just as like a bit of gentle fatigue, if you like. And then in the evening, I'd either try and join up with the group in some way. But generally, the recoveries would be quite short. It would be, you know, a volume would be somewhere between 7 to up to 12 miles. Um, So it could be, I'm trying to think of some of the ones, you know, it could just be, 8 by 5 minutes with 60 seconds recovery, um, and, running probably a little bit slower than half marathon pace, something like
Yeah.
that.
So is that day then usually like w- when you look at it at the end of the day, do you usually end up at like around 20 miles in total and or
Yeah,
30K
so
plus?
yeah, usually at least that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So somewhere between 19 to 24 miles.
Hmm.
So yeah, somewhere between 30 and 40K.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a fairly big day.
Yeah, that's a
But
big day.
it's not but because the recoveries are quite short, and it's not an interval session in the morning. It's not like super intense. But yeah, there's a lot of, I'd say that's like yeah, it's an interval day.
Yeah.
Wednesday again. So Wednesday and Thursday would again be, fairly relaxed, very relaxed, especially Wednesday. You know, 10 to 12 miles, either split or single. It sort of didn't really, that would be more just how my work cycle, whether I need to take marking home or not, or all of that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. And I try and
But
fit
is
in.
are those then the like say the Monday and the Wednesday and Thursday? Do you usually stay at the same pace or intensity for those easy runs, or do you also differentiate based on like having a harder, bigger day the day before?
So I mean, when the day after the big workout would definitely just be, you know, we should talk about it being either easy or very easy.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
because, sometimes you feel great. And as long as you're feeling easy and your heart rate's fairly low, that pace could differ by 30 seconds per kilometer,
Hmm.
depending on just so many different factors, how well you slept. So there certainly wouldn't be a pace prescription on those. It would just be about feel. Um,
Yeah.
I'd usually try and fit in some strength work on Wednesday just because I want, it's a balance between recovering, but also not being too fatigued for that Friday session. So I try and do that on Wednesday. And so yeah, Thursday again, easy, easy 10 to 12 miles. And then Friday it would depend. I mean, sometimes we might do another double. It might be another double. But more often than not, it would be a sort of single longer efforts, often sort of oscillating between over and under marathon pace. So I think one of the sort of the longer version of that I did was 14 miles, but with 1 mile a bit slower than marathon pace and 1 mile a bit faster than marathon pace. So
Hmm.
overall, it was averaging about marathon pace for 14 miles. And that started off at around 8 miles and then gradually built up to 14, which was the
Yeah.
longest. Um, so just trying to build a bit of durability around going up and under marathon pace, but all continuous.
And how do you feel after like that workout? Are you because obviously like if you have marathon pace for 14 miles, that is fast, but you're still 12 miles shorter than the full distance. What
Yeah,
is when
I
you get
mean,
home? How do you feel?
if I'm honest, those efforts are pretty hard. I mean, because on race day, things just you turn into somebody different, right? You're capable of so much more on race day than you are uh, on a dark Friday night after a week of
Yep.
work. So those, if I'm honest, those are the sessions in general that I've struggled with the most. I was really lucky that the last one I did of those, the longest one I did of those, I was able to execute really well. I really prepared for it. I, tried to make a bit of time for it and focused on it. I had a little bit of somebody helping me out. But in general, those are the ones where, I've either needed to take a quick break for the toilet, or I've had to adjust the paces because I just felt really tired. Those would definitely be the most demanding sessions that
Hmm.
that I've done. So that would be, quite a big day, especially if I've done 5 or 6 miles easy in the morning, and then you've got 14 miles plus warm up and cool down. that could easily be another 23-mile day, possibly
Yeah.
up to.
Hmm.
So I'm probably I'm giving you kind of what the biggest of those days. If I
Yeah.
had a
Yeah. That's
really big
fine.
Tuesday, I wouldn't have then done 14 miles on the Friday. Would have been
Yeah.
it would
Okay.
a lesser version. Um, and then Saturday again, easy. I might do a few weights on Saturday. My strength routine is it's fairly well established, but I think it could be more. It could, there are things there that could be more specific. Just some standards of general chain stuff with squats, deadlifts, um, yeah, mostly that kind of stuff. Some upper body stuff, but nothing major. And then Sunday again would be dependent on Friday. So if I'd done a big thing on Friday, Sunday would be a longer run, but pretty chill. And if it
Mhm.
was a little bit less, we would definitely have some marathon specific stuff on the Sunday. And sometimes that would just be, you know, a 30K, 35K with every 6 or 7K at marathon pace.
Yeah.
Just to almost like split it up and remind yourself of what it's like to run fast but controlled. Um, and then some of those sessions would be really marathon specific, and there are a couple of really big sessions in there, like uh, 3 by 6 miles, so roughly 10K, 3 by 10K with a mile floats in between. So those would be there'd be some big sessions there on the Sunday. Um, Dependent on what was on Friday. So, yeah, it's the
A-
Tuesday, Friday, Sunday.
And so the length of that long run, is that the same kind of regardless of what the Friday was like? Is just the work in it that is changing, or is the run also shorter if you had a hard Friday?
Um, uh, Certainly early on, the volume wouldn't really change. It would be, somewhere between 16 and 20 miles. It just the intensity of it would vary. As we got sort of in that sort of last six weeks or so, it would be a little bit more sensitive, if you like, to the Friday, just because when you're running 25 miles on the Sunday and getting, with some effort in there, that's really going to be dependent. Your Friday is going to have an impact on that. Whereas if it was just 16 miles and you're used to that, you can kind of get away with just doing 16 miles.
Yeah.
So as you got sort of closer to the time, there was a bit more sensitivity to how those big efforts played out.
Mhm. Okay, thank you for sharing that. Then we know what your training week looked like, at least roughly. And then you did mention that you did some heat training in the block, or heading into Valencia. Is that something that was like very structured heat training, or was it more to just get adjusted to the warmer temperatures in Spain?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's been a lot of stuff that's sort of been, you know, the impact of heat training is fairly well established as having a number of benefits, not just if it's a warm day, but just in terms of your general ability to sweat and cool yourself down. Um, I was conscious that Valencia is known for its good weather in general, but it had the potential for being a little bit warm. So I kind of, it was a bit of especially because heat training can be, you can get quite a bit of benefit from just a few concentrated weeks of effort in terms of getting some heat training in. So, you know, I wasn't keen, and neither was our washing machine keen on doing heat training consistently throughout the block, because you end up sweating. Especially if you're doing properly and wearing several layers. It's a lot of stuff to wash. I hadn't really
Hmm.
learned that. So I did a mixture of layers on the treadmill. I didn't do that many runs. I think I only did 4 runs layered um, inside. So I quite often would wear a few extra layers running outside. But when you're running inside, you really sweat pretty
Yeah.
quickly. And then I also did a bit of sauna work, which is much more enjoyable. Um, it doesn't have the same impact of, you're not cardiovascularly working whilst you're on the heat pressure. But that was a kind of a more enjoyable way of getting some heat training in as well. So
Mm.
I, I I I enjoy going to the sauna. So I have that's something I've sort of done semi regularly for a while. But I try to make that quite a consistent part of the last 3 weeks.
And you did say that you felt like it paid off. In what way is it that or how are you able to kind of say that it paid off? Did you notice something or?
I I just people were pouring water over themselves, and also post race people said, "Oh yeah, it's getting a bit warm towards the end," and certainly saw things people mentioning that on social media. And I just genuinely didn't feel like that was a concern of mine. I didn't feel myself
Okay. Yeah.
overheating. I didn't feel like the need to. I did get a little bit of water just to cool myself down, but it was almost at the point where I was like, "Am I going to get cold?"
Yeah, right.
So
Yes. So the benefit that you really felt, or the one that you can kind of prove that most likely helped you, is more the feeling of the heat in the moment. But it could also be that you had some performance benefits that you don't, because that's obviously hard to
it's really
put your
hard. Yeah,
point
I
the
I
finger at.
wasn't. Yeah, I wasn't. I guess the way to do that would be to get some testing pre and post
Yeah.
heat training, which would be fun to do. But
Hmm.
I think I'm prepared to believe the science out there and implement something that broadly follows a rough protocol. I wasn't following an exact thing. Again,
Yeah.
that was just like, how much marking have I got today? Have I got my lessons planned? And if I've got time, I'll be 20 minutes in the sauna. If I don't, that's life.
Yeah.
Uh,
So the last question that I have for you on this training and the structure that you have around your training is, uh, we talked about before we started recording that you are doing all of this with like fairly busy life on the side. Like, you have a job and you're a teacher. You're also exposed to a lot of people, so you have to be socially on kind of, but you also have to uh you know, I talked to several runners about this, that you are facing more germs because they're just, you're around people. If people have the flu, like the cold, you're more exposed to that. And you have just the hours of working. And now you're also going to be a dad next year. Uh, I like to think that I'm 33 years old and I'm very young. So, like, I can't really, people can't relate to me. And then I realized that, I'm 33 years old. I have a full time job myself. And so, like, kind of just like you, we are probably more relatable to people than most. I might be more relatable because I'm not as fast as you are. But I think that you kind of prove that it's possible to put a lot of work in, like, to your running, and you're able to run this fast, and you have a job. It's not like you're a full-time athlete. So, long answer, but how are you able to combine this?
yeah, I mean, I think all time is finite. Um, so there's definitely sacrifices that are made in terms of you know social engagements that you turn down. Um, other things that one might be doing. Um, like my wife and I planned a holiday after Valencia because my training had taken up a lot of time, and that was something that she was prepared to sort of be happy for me to do and support me with doing. But these things aren't these things. It's not that I'm not trying to like say it's easy, but if you can, for me, for example, from where I live in comparison to my school, if I drive in the morning, it's actually twice as long for me to get there because traffic is terrible and you have to
Yeah.
have to go route round. Whereas at running, I can go direct there. It's 8K door to door, and it's so much more efficient for me to do. And I think it comes back to this thing that we talked about at the beginning around motivation and routine. You know, if you can find ways of making routines easy and fitting in with your life, you can make time work for you a little bit better. So, for me, getting 16K a day or 12K a day in just commuting, essentially, sometimes I might add in a little bit extra on the way back because I'm catching up with a friend who's also running. But essentially, that is free mileage for me. That
Yeah.
isn't adding extra time to my life because the other option is driving, which is going to take me
Exactly.
longer and I'm going to lose time. So, if I didn't have that, if I wasn't able to run commute, I probably wouldn't be able to run the mileage and fit in all the other things that I'm able to do. So, and in terms of our two, the track and the main place here in Cambridge where we train on the road is literally en route to and from. My
Hmm.
gym is about 100 meters off my main commute route. So I feel incredibly lucky that I almost, it wasn't planned like this, but I've just managed to be in a position where things are I can make things relatively efficient for the life that I'm living. Um,
Yeah.
and I'm lucky enough to do that, but that's not possible for everyone. So
No. But it's about making it a convenience, I guess. That's kind of what you're saying. That it,
yeah,
like, obviously you can find extra time, but I think that most of us, if we are, it's, I do agree with you. It's not like everyone will find themselves in the same situation as you. But for me, for instance, it's like I can go out for a run when I'm taking my dog out because he needs to go out anyways, right? Like I can take him with me and we do a little jog in the morning, and then, oh, there are a few more Ks there, and I'll do some more around lunch if I have a lunch break. There are options, and you hear a lot of people talking about it. I'm not necessarily the greatest example of this myself. I have a home office, so I don't really have to commute in that way. But I do still think that what you're saying really makes sense, and that most people can make it their like a convenient part of their day, one way or the other.
mm,
Mhm.
yeah. And for me, it's also been a little bit about thinking about what you know as one's trying to improve. Sometimes it's not necessarily about what can I add to my training, but what sort of changes can I make that might make things easier? I mean, one small example is, I've been actually this build, I haven't been run commuting as much in the sense that previously it'd be literally every day running to and from pretty much.
Yeah.
And this time I've actually thought, maybe if I'm running with a backpack a lot of the time, it's not got lots in it, but it might be affecting my form a little bit. So actually I'm going
Hmm.
to try and cycle to work and then do my run at work once I get there, or just do it at the end of the day as a single
Yeah.
run, and my form can be a bit more efficient. And I think I've come to the conclusion now that yes, that might be true, but I'm also now I'm losing that extra 20, 30 minutes each way from cycling. That's
Yeah.
lost time because I'm having to then do the run on top of that. And actually, I think probably if I just accept the fact that I might not have the as perfect running form for those runs, there are perhaps other things that I could be doing. That little extra 15 minutes of strength work, a little bit more time at home with the family, maybe seeing some more of my friends to keep myself motivated, or sleeping an extra half an hour is possibly going to be a better marginal gain. And so I'm not really necessarily adding anything in. I'm just switching around how I'm how I'm managing the trip.
Yeah. No, that totally makes sense, and I appreciate you sharing that, because I think, at least for me, I can tell for myself that it inspires me to hear about these things, like, and also like everything that you say about sleep as well, and that's something to kind of take into account when we talk about these things. That, okay, you get to run more, but does it affect other parts of your life that also is important to your performance or to staying free of injuries and all of this? It's a big picture that we need to figure out, and I think that is kind of the most interesting thing about the whole
Mhm.
running in the first place.
And actually makes it, it might one could say it adds a little bit of extra stress, maybe, when you're trying to balance all of these things. But I think if you can frame it more as a kind of more as an exciting puzzle, I'm sure we'd all love to have more time to do various things. But actually, if you can find ways of framing it in a positive way of like, how am I getting the most out of myself with the constraints that I've got? Then you're more likely to enjoy getting the most out of yourself.
Yeah. Okay, we only have a couple of minutes left here now, but I feel like I still have to ask you, and we don't have to go through Valencia like the whole race, but just like that feeling of finishing in 2:15, because it's an exceptional time. It's fast. Can you kind of just describe that feeling crossing the finish line, 2:15? And I also know that you had a bit of an incident just after crossing that finish line, but except for that, add that as well if you want to. But
Yeah, yeah, it was a funny thing the last sort of 500 meters because I the last 500s the starting to well the last 2K was hurting quite a bit. The last 500 you're coming onto the blue carpet. It's all really cool. There was some other guys that I could see were struggling even more than me, and I thought, right, I can definitely take them. In fact, I passed one of them with about 350 to go. Came on to the last straight, 200 to go, and then just my guts gave out. And I was thinking, okay, I just throw up on the side as I'm running, and your body just doesn't let you do that. It's incredible. I was like, come on, you just throw up as you run. No, you have to stop. And then the crowds are there, and they're loving it. They're loving it. It's like, oh, it's another one. Whoa. And then the guy comes past me. I got on there, and then finally it sort of stops, and I'm able to go. And I just felt $1,000,000 actually. I
wow.
I haven't actually checked exactly what pace I got up to, but that last 150, I was flying. It felt so good. So actually, at least that last bit, it was a little bit of frustration that I hadn't been able to just finish the races I'd wanted to. But um, yeah, it's yeah. I I think if you've really got the most out of yourself, you can, you see the sort of the picture of Alex, he crossing the line. He's obviously completely ecstatic and he'd run, it seems like he'd run the perfect race, right? But
Yeah.
I I still feel like the last couple of times I've crossed the line, these last two marathons I've crossed, I've been pretty white.
Hmm.
Uh, but I also sort of appreciate that in myself. That I know I've really got the most out of my body on the day. Um, I couldn't have done anything else to run faster on that particular day. Um, so that's kind of that's a reassurance. So yeah, I wouldn't say the last couple of marathons have been ones that I have crossed feeling like wow.
No.
It's more like how do I not throw up in the cameras? Um,
But does it strike you ever, like, if we look now back at like the days and weeks since Valencia, do you ever stop and be like, I actually did a 2:15 marathon? Like, there are not a lot of people who can say that they've done that. Like, it might feel like that these days because so many people are running and you see it on social media, but 2:15 is just like such an incredible performance and thing to like achievement. Do you stop and reflect on that ever?
It's really interesting. My school asked me to write a piece for their magazine that they produce once a year. I was really struggling actually to think about what to write for it, for a long time. It took me a long time to write it, but in the end, I sort of realized that actually, the really one of the big things that I've come to realize with running, and we all experience this, is that very easy to, as soon as we achieve something, to look at what's next.
Yeah.
Um, and and even and so I think it really is. Yeah, in writing that piece, I realized how important it was for me to just take the time to think about not just that actually I'm really proud of that 2:15, but actually to go back and think of 3 years ago or 6 years ago, 10 years ago, like that. I I ran sort of 8 5Ks back to back at a time that I couldn't have run one 5K 10 years ago.
Hmm.
Um, and that's really cool. And that's not to say that we if you take that approach, that's not to say that you don't have to you don't have to sort of be content and then be like, oh, that's it. I'm so much,
Yeah.
look how far I've come. You can still have aspirations for achieving more,
Yeah.
but I think we owe it to ourselves and our younger selves to like allow them to be proud of us in our own selves. So yeah, it's good to be reminded, Christian. Thanks. That those it is. Yeah, I'm.
Yeah,
I'm.
you should be proud.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. So last question, what's next? Like what are your goals and what is next for you?
Well, I know that having a baby isn't going to be like the sort of the natural step to a running progression, but I think that's just something you then sort of you sort of reevaluate how you structure things. You know, I'm 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 already lucky enough to be able to go 4 days a week at school. So I'm probably going to take some of the shared parental leave, so there'll be some lessening of stresses for a bit. You just don't know how things are going to pan out. I still have great aspirations for what I can hopefully achieve next year. I think I feel like there's, especially with my half marathon time and potentially some scope on mileage front, that my marathon probably has the most scope for improvement. Um, I I really want to get my 10K and half time a little bit down. So I feel like I'd like to get a 28 something 10K to my name. I'm going to run the local 5K half marathon here in Cambridge, the Cambridge Half, because I've run that a couple of times and I've won it a couple of times. So that's kind of cool to win on your home turf. So I'll do that at the beginning of March. But apart from that, at the moment, I haven't got anything sort of nailed on. So yeah, I'm looking for something in maybe January or February time, a fast 10K or a fast half. I'm probably going to leave off a marathon until the autumn.
Yeah.
If something exciting pops up, maybe, but I obviously the summer isn't necessarily the best time to be racing a marathon. But
No.
so probably a marathon in the autumn, all being well. That fits well with my sort of with my life as a teacher because we get obviously a good summer break. So I mean, I would just like to keep improving. If I'm honest. I have written down some sort of like time goals, but I think those are just things to sort of think about and not get sort of overly stressed by, but just to have as like, I think is almost as a marker of if I am going to try and achieve this, I need to take it seriously.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
No, that
rather
makes
than
sense.
rather than just saying, "Oh, I want to get tattoo." I think one can end up being a little bit complacent. Whereas if you actually put something a little bit scary on paper and say,
Hmm.
"I'd like to try and do this," you at
Yeah.
least then take the mindset of, "I need to be doing the little things right day to day."
Yes. Exactly. No, I totally agree with you, and I can definitely relate to that. So yeah, Jonathan, thank you so much for everything you shared. And it's yeah, this has been a lot of fun. Time just flew by, and I wish you all the luck in the new year, especially like becoming a dad. I guess that is much bigger than any marathon and any PR. So wish you all the luck with that, and thanks again for guesting the Marathon Podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Jonathan, for sharing all of this, being open about it, and again, to you for listening, for being here. Really appreciate all of you. I think this is another great episode. And if you enjoyed what you listened to here, please give this podcast a review wherever you are listening. Follow the Marathon Podcast. And if you want to help this podcast and help yourself, use the code Christian or look at the show notes to get 20% off an annual subscription of Strava, or use some other discounts that are down there. Thank you so much again. Have a great rest of your day and have a nice weekend. I'll talk to you in the next one. You listen to the Marathon Podcast, brought to you by Wild Studio. And you can get this hat, pre-order it on the marathonpodcast.com.